Day 82. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. Today, newly released forensic data from the FBI confirms she did not leave her property in silence. Former FBI profiler Jim Clemente analyzed the physical evidence recovered from the concrete porch. The blood spatter pattern is highly specific and clinically revealing. It consists of upward-facing droplets rather than a continuous downward trail. This specific orientation eliminates the working theory of a sudden medical emergency or a voluntary departure. The geometry of the blood indicates a violent physical struggle. An 84-year-old woman was forced to the ground right outside her own door. The analysis suggests she fought back against her attacker. She sustained blunt force trauma and coughed up blood before being carried away. The absence of a secondary drip trail means she was likely lifted horizontally. This is not a case of someone wandering off into the Arizona desert. This is a targeted and calculated extraction. The physical evidence on the porch directly contradicts the ongoing silence from local authorities. Pima County investigators possess this exact forensic profile. They understand the mechanical nature of the assault, yet they maintain a strict information embargo regarding the most critical digital artifact in this entire case. A neighborhood security system located exactly 2.5 miles away captured a distinct anomaly. A vehicle was recorded moving through the dark residential streets. This movement was logged at precisely 2:28 in the morning. This timestamp is not random. It aligns perfectly with a catastrophic failure in the victim medical monitoring equipment. We need to systematically deconstruct why detectives refuse to explain the presence of that specific car. We must examine the exact timeline of a predator who successfully bypassed multiple security parameters. This perpetrator managed to subdue a victim and vanish without triggering an immediate alarm. The data points currently available point toward a highly organized operation. We are looking at a sequence of events that requires advanced planning and familiarity with the target location. Every piece of physical and digital evidence will be cataloged and scrutinized here. If you want to follow the raw forensic data as this ongoing investigation unfolds, hit the subscribe button for Tracking Evil with John. We rely entirely on verified timelines and physical evidence rather than internet speculation. The blood volume found at the scene was substantial enough to sequence a complete DNA profile. However, the positioning of the stain is the true indicator of the assault mechanics. Clemente noted that the concentration of biological material was localized to one specific quadrant of the entryway. This suggests the attacker pinned the victim against the architecture of the house. The perpetrator likely neutralized her primary means of calling for help immediately. We are evaluating a scenario where the suspect utilized the darkness and the structural blind spots of the property. The exact angle of the blood spatter points away from the front door. This geometric detail implies she was facing her attacker as she was struck down. The perpetrator did not strike from behind. They confronted her directly before rendering her incapacitated. To understand the precision of this attack, we must establish the baseline timeline of the final confirmed sighting. The sequence begins on the evening of January 31st. At exactly 9:50 at night, Tommaso Cioni drove his mother-in-law back to her residence in the Catalina foothills. The NBC News timeline confirms he pulled into the driveway and dropped her off near the entrance. Cioni stated he watched her walk toward the house. The garage door was documented as closing. This is the final verified visual confirmation of Nancy Guthrie alive. The environment was secure at this specific minute. The neighborhood is affluent and generally isolated from transient foot traffic. There were no reports of suspicious activity in the immediate vicinity during this drop-off window. The timeline then experiences a 14-hour gap of physical verification. It is not until 11:56 the next morning on February 1st that the Pima County Police dispatched logs an emergency call. Family members arrived at the residence to check on her welfare. They found the property empty. The house was locked, but the resident was missing. The transition from a secure environment at 9:50 at night to an active crime scene by noon the next day narrows our window of opportunity. The perpetrator had to execute the abduction within the dark hours. They had to account for the victim schedule and the layout of the Catalina Foothills property. The physical timeline provides the boundaries of the crime, but the physical timeline alone is insufficient. Human memory is flawed, and eyewitness accounts in the dark are statistically unreliable. To locate the exact moment the attack commenced, we cannot rely on statements. We must abandon the physical reports and transition entirely into the encrypted digital footprint left behind that night. The victim was wearing a medical device that communicated with external servers. The house was equipped with a digital surveillance perimeter. The neighborhood was mapped by private security lenses. The answers are not in the witness statements. The answers are buried in the raw data transmitted between 1:47 and 2:28 in the morning. We will now extract those timestamps. We must examine the encrypted digital timeline to understand the sequence of the attack. The primary optical sensor of the residence was neutralized at 1:47 in the morning. A masked individual wearing protective gloves physically disconnected the front doorbell security system. This specific action establishes premeditation and a clear awareness of residential surveillance technology. 25 minutes of absolute digital silence followed the initial camera system failure. Secondary motion sensors registered physical movement at the perimeter at 2:12 in the morning. The perpetrator was actively navigating the exterior layout of the Catalina Foothills property. The final critical data point was recorded at precisely 2:28 in the morning. The pacemaker worn by the victim ceased transmitting physiological synchronization signals to the medical network. Exactly 41 minutes elapsed between the initial optical blackout and the physiological termination. This specific 41-minute window encapsulates the entirety of the localized physical confrontation. The calculation of this interval fundamentally recontextualizes the biological material recovered from the entryway. We previously established the geometric patterns indicating blunt force trauma and physical resistance. We must now analyze what the total absence of secondary biological transfers signifies. The violent struggle occurred and the victim was rendered physically incapacitated on the concrete. The perpetrator then managed to contain the crime scene immediately following the initial assault. They executed a clean extraction of an injured 84-year-old woman. Investigators found absolutely no drag marks across the driveway or the adjacent walkway. There is zero transfer of biological material on the surrounding vegetation or exterior walls. The attacker did not exhibit signs of panic or chaotic movement following the physical altercation. They lifted the victim horizontally to prevent further contamination of the immediate crime scene. This physical maneuver requires significant upper body strength and intense psychological control under pressure. This level of scene management dismantles any working theory of a random residential burglary. A panicked opportunistic burglar typically flees the property immediately upon encountering unexpected physical resistance. This specific individual stayed to ensure the victim was completely removed without leaving a directional trail. The initial violence was strictly localized to a single quadrant of the front porch. The localized biological evidence proves a severe confrontation took place outside the locked door. The complete lack of secondary physical evidence proves the attacker maintained absolute command of the environment. The physiological network failure marks the exact moment the victim was taken off the property. The biological marker remains permanently stained on the concrete architecture of the house. The physical body of the victim remains entirely absent from the active search grid. If analyzing these forensic contradictions helps you understand the severity of this operation, please hit the like button so this data reaches a wider audience. The rigorous containment of the primary attack zone forces investigators to reevaluate the perpetrator profile. It requires law enforcement to examine exactly how the suspect vanished so efficiently into the darkness. The physical extraction of the victim leaves a secondary data trail extending far beyond the immediate property line. According to Fox 10 Phoenix, a residential surveillance lens captured vehicular movement precisely matching the physiological failure window. A neighboring camera system recorded approximately 12 vehicles traversing the isolated arterial roads located 2.5 miles from the primary crime scene. This traffic anomaly occurred almost exactly at 2:30 in the morning. This volume of transit is highly irregular for that specific geographic sector during the early morning hours. The timestamp of this vehicular cluster synchronizes flawlessly with the 2:28 termination of the victim pacemaker. We are observing the exact temporal corridor of the suspect escape route. Law enforcement currently holds the high-definition files containing these transit records. Pima County detectives actively refuse to release the vehicle makes or models to the public. They possess the optical data necessary to track the extraction trajectory, yet they maintain an absolute blackout regarding the specific vehicles captured in that narrow window. We must systematically question the strategic purpose of this localized information embargo. Withholding vehicular data typically serves one of two specific operational objectives. Investigators either lack the digital resolution to identify a license plate, or they are intentionally protecting an active surveillance operation. The refusal to request public assistance in identifying these vehicles indicates a highly specific investigative strategy. It implies detectives might already know exactly who was driving through the darkness that night. Are they concealing a dead end, or are they quietly building a localized perimeter around a known suspect? The intentional suppression of vehicular data forces the investigative focus back to the immediate architecture of the residence. The physical reality of the assault location presents a severe mechanical contradiction. Crime scene technicians documented absolutely no signs of forced entry across the exterior of the house. The perpetrator accessed the front entryway without triggering a perimeter breach alarm or causing structural damage. This specific logistical access significantly narrows the statistical probability of a random opportunistic intrusion. We are examining an operative who either possessed advanced bypass capabilities or was already known to the target. This deductive pathway inevitably directs massive public scrutiny toward the immediate family network. According to NBC News, immense social pressure is currently mounting against Nancy Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni. They were the last verified individuals to interact with the victim within a secure environment. The confirmed timeline establishes they possessed intimate knowledge of the property layout and the victim schedule. The digital and physical evidence requires us to analyze the mechanics of familial proximity. A familiar face at the door mathematically explains the lack of forced entry and the immediate localization of the assault. The current law enforcement silence amplifies the ambient suspicion surrounding the family unit. Detectives are systematically isolating the inner circle while refusing to explain the distant vehicular anomaly. You must consider the psychological weight of this specific operational strategy. If you recognize the tactical patterns being deployed by the Pima County investigators, please subscribe to Tracking Evil with John for continued forensic analysis. The analytical framework strongly supports a domestic or localized threat model. The available evidence points toward an individual who weaponized their proximity to the victim. The investigative timeline appeared entirely locked onto this specific inner circle, but precisely as public consensus finalized the domestic violence theory, a separate data point materialized. An anomalous digital transmission bypassed local authorities entirely and dismantled the fundamental premise of a localized familial dispute. The domestic violence hypothesis relies on the containment of information because a localized perpetrator inherently seeks to minimize external variables. This operational logic fractured entirely when a digital financial demand surfaced outside the immediate jurisdiction of Pima County. The perpetrator circumvented standard law enforcement communication channels to initiate contact. A sophisticated extortion document demanding millions in cryptocurrency was transmitted directly to national media conglomerates, including TMZ. This specific routing protocol is highly anomalous within standard kidnapping and ransom paradigms. Extortionists generally require a controlled and isolated environment to negotiate financial transfers securely with the target family. Broadcasting a ransom demand to the global press apparatus immediately triggers maximum federal scrutiny and technical tracking algorithms. Former federal profilers analyzing this communication categorized the transmission as operating strictly in bad faith. The primary objective is demonstrably not wealth acquisition or financial negotiation. The structural linguistics of the demand indicate a calculated effort to publicly humiliate the Guthrie family network. The perpetrator actively weaponized the celebrity status of the extended family to generate a massive media spectacle. This psychological profile deviates significantly from a standard opportunistic criminal or an impulsive domestic aggressor. We are evaluating an operative who thrives on the manipulation of public perception and institutional vulnerability. The digital footprint of the Bitcoin demand requires advanced cryptographic routing to avoid immediate trace logic. The sender utilized encrypted proxy servers to bounce the transmission across multiple jurisdictions before hitting the media inbox. This technical sophistication points toward a highly organized entity rather than a panicked individual attempting to cover localized assault. The external ransom note fundamentally reconfigures the entire threat assessment model for this investigation. The individual who bypassed the optical sensors at 1:47 in the morning is likely the same entity manipulating the national news cycle weeks later. They possess the physical capability to extract a victim without a trace and the digital capability to mock federal investigators publicly. This transitions the investigative matrix from a localized grid search to a complex cyber intelligence operation. The suspect is actively monitoring the public reaction to their correspondence and adjusting their operational posture. They are utilizing the press as an operational tool to exert psychological pressure on the survivors and the investigating agencies. The Pima County detectives are engaged in an asymmetric information war with an adversary who controls the narrative timeline. The intentional distribution of the ransom note to external entities introduces a severe complication into any potential negotiation process. The perpetrator deliberately burned the bridge of confidential communication to ensure maximum collateral damage. Drop down into the comments below and outline your analytical hypothesis regarding the true motive of an extortionist who intentionally alerts the global media before contacting the victim family. The psychological mechanics of this specific offender require collective forensic scrutiny from multiple analytical perspectives. The investigative apparatus is currently burdened by this media manipulation tactic. The authorities are forced to allocate resources to verify the authenticity of a document designed primarily for public consumption. This verification process consumes critical operational hours while the primary physical search grid remains stagnant. The suspect effectively diverted the operational focus from the ground search to the digital forensic analysis of cryptocurrency wallets. The structural reality of this investigation 82 days post-extraction is defined by absolute informational darkness. The Pima County Sheriff Department maintains a rigorous operational embargo across all digital and physical evidence files relating to the timeline. Law enforcement has executed 0 confirmed arrests in connection with the disappearance of the 84-year-old victim. The primary crime scene on the concrete porch remains the only verified location of physical interaction between the attacker and the target. Search and rescue operations across the Catalina foothills sectors have yielded negative results regarding the location of the missing individual. The physical body remains entirely unaccounted for within the established geographical mapping grid. The architectural layout of the evidence presents severe analytical friction for the profiling units. Investigators possess a confirmed biological anomaly on a localized exterior surface. They possess digital optical anomalies correlating directly with physiological network failures. They possess a sophisticated digital extortion file distributed across national media networks. Yet these distinct investigative vectors have failed to converge upon a single identifiable suspect profile or physical location. The official status of the case is classified strictly as an ongoing active investigation with no designated primary suspect. We must confront the lack of a definitive resolution with absolute analytical objectivity. The investigative apparatus is operating against an adversary who successfully neutralized physical security parameters and digital tracing mechanisms simultaneously. The operational silence from the authorities indicates they are either building a highly classified federal indictment or they are entirely devoid of actionable leads. 2 critical operational voids continue to define this forensic timeline and stall the investigative momentum. The identity of the operator driving the vehicle, recorded at exactly 2:30 in the morning, remains permanently obscured from the public record. The cryptological identity of the individual who routed the extortion demand through proxy servers to national media outlets remains untraced. These 2 specific variables represent the foundational architecture of the entire hostile operation. The individual executing the physical extraction may be entirely compartmentalized from the entity managing the digital extortion framework. The complexity of the operation suggests a multi-layered threat model requiring significant logistical coordination. The absence of a physical resolution forces the analytical focus onto the enduring psychological impact of the extraction itself. An elderly resident was forcibly removed from a secure environment, leaving only geometric biological markers on the concrete. A highly organized entity successfully bypassed multiple layers of localized security without triggering an immediate emergency response. The perimeter of safety surrounding the residential sector was permanently compromised within a narrow 41-minute operational window. Technical execution of the assault demonstrates that absolute security is a statistical illusion engineered by residential surveillance marketing. The perpetrator leveraged the darkness and the isolated topography of the neighborhood to execute a flawless physical extraction. The digital manipulation of the media cycle proves their capacity for sustained psychological operations against institutional targets. The suspect remains entirely unverified and untracked within the general population matrix. We are left analyzing the residual data points of a predator who understands exactly how to dismantle the systems designed to detect them. The architecture of this crime is a constant reminder that the most sophisticated threats operate silently just outside the optical range of the primary security network. Most residential security systems operate on the flawed assumption that an intruder actively wants to avoid detection. What this case teaches us about criminal counter-surveillance is critical for evaluating your own vulnerabilities. Localized optical networks are highly susceptible to targeted and premeditated disruption. We rely heavily on consumer-grade doorbell cameras to establish a definitive physical perimeter around our properties. Yet this specific investigation demonstrates that a standard digital lens provides zero protection against a mathematically prepared adversary. The perpetrator at the Guthrie residence did not attempt to bypass the camera field of view through traditional stealth. They executed a direct physical neutralization of the primary exterior sensor. This aggressive tactic requires a completely different analytical approach to modern home security architecture. Relying on a single optical node creates a massive single point of failure within your primary defense perimeter. Counter-surveillance methodology dictates that all security layers must overlap and operate completely independently of one another. If a primary outward-facing camera is manually disabled, a secondary concealed sensor must immediately register that physical disruption. The tactical advantage during a home invasion always belongs to the entity that understands the technical limitations of your monitoring equipment. The attacker utilized non-reflective dark clothing and specific facial concealment protocols. These synthetic materials are specifically engineered to degrade the effectiveness of standard infrared optical sensors. The operator clearly understood the exact focal length and the trigger delay of the targeted doorbell lens. They approached the hardware from an acute angle that minimized facial exposure before the system was forcibly disconnected. This level of operational security signifies a highly advanced and organized threat model. Standard consumer hardware is simply not designed to repel this specific type of calculated physical intrusion. You must critically evaluate your own residential perimeter by analyzing the structural optical blind spots. We must immediately transition our fundamental understanding from passive digital monitoring to active redundant physical verification. An isolated camera is merely a recording device unless it is supported by a comprehensive architectural security strategy. We must now return to the primary visual anomaly defining this entire forensic investigation. A localized, off-site camera recorded a vehicle moving rapidly through the darkness at exactly 2:30 in the morning. That singular piece of suppressed optical data represents the exact temporal window when the victim permanently vanished. The biological evidence recovered from the porch remains strictly locked inside the federal crime laboratory. The digital extortion demands continue to successfully manipulate the national public narrative and misdirect investigative resources. We will systematically track every new forensic update and monitor every localized anomaly as this active investigation develops. You need to hit subscribe right now to ensure you receive the next crucial analytical breakdown. We will process the raw data when the Pima County authorities finally declassify the vehicular tracking information. The entire structural integrity of this case relies absolutely on identifying that specific operator moving through the night. Do you analytically believe the local detectives are maintaining strict radio silence because they are tracking a known suspect? Or are the authorities currently completely blinded by a highly sophisticated counter-surveillance operation executed by an unknown entity? A vehicle seamlessly navigating a dark arterial road suggests a localized predator operating with absolute structural impunity. A meticulously staged digital ransom note confirms their advanced capability to manipulate the broader law enforcement System. An 84-year-old woman remains unaccounted for after a violent, localized extraction from her own front porch. Until the suppressed optical data finally illuminates the operator behind that wheel, you must tightly secure your own perimeter.